good.
That's better.
That's nice.
Okay.
Okay, we did it. Okay, so let's just keep this recording and I'll just chop this section out.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to No Couch Required. 2 therapists, too many feelings, not enough chill.
This is basically the podcast version of your most validating group chat. If it were run by 2 therapists with zero bullshit, big hearts, and a knack for turning emotional chaos into conversation.
We're unpacking healing, mental health, and all the messiness in between with humor, honesty, and maybe even a little ethically sourced tea from the therapy room. No couch
Or copay
required.
Hi, I'm Kayla Judd, a licensed marriage and family therapist. I specialize in complex trauma and PTSD. And I primarily work with couples navigating relationship conflict and the lasting impacts of childhood trauma using emotionally focused therapy and somatic EMDR.
And I'm Ashley Wright, a licensed clinical social worker. I also specialize in complex trauma and PTSD, and I work with individuals healing from childhood, relational, and sexual trauma to help them reconnect with themselves in a grounded, embodied way.
Before we dive in, a quick disclaimer. Even though we're therapists, this podcast isn't therapy and it's not a replacement for professional mental health care. Listening doesn't create a therapist-client relationship.
If you're struggling, we encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area. And if you're in crisis in the U.S., you can dial or text 988 for immediate support.
Okay, let's get in today's episode.
Welcome back to episode 4. So excited to be here.
This is fun.
Today we're going to talk about emotionally focused therapy.
I'm so excited.
I'm really excited to learn more about it because this is really your bread and butter. So Kayla's going to be doing a lot of the episode today. I really, every time I'm like, she's going to do most of the session today. Like we're doing co-therapy. So Kayla, tell us what EFT is.
I'm feeling really excited and I'm nervous because I definitely am not like the most knowledgeable about this, but maybe that's my imposter syndrome.
And you're passionate about it.
I'm super passionate about it. I love this stuff. I remember when I learned about it in school and I was like, this is so exciting. But I was on this path to doing Gottman therapy. And so it took me some time. When I first did my first training, it was just like a total fire hose. So I tell therapists now, if you're going to do the first training, you're just going to have to do your best to swallow that down and then get into the next training because that's where the good learning begins. But so emotionally focused therapy is based off of attachment theory. A lot of people might know sort of the story. I don't know. I feel like you probably learned it in human development or something about the ducks imprinting.
Oh, yeah.
Do you ever remember that?
Vaguely. Yeah.
We won't get into it, but it was Konrad Lorenz's work on imprinting that, what was Bowlby's first name?
John
Bowlby took a lot of his attachment theory work from Lorenz's work on imprinting.
Oh.
And he was the one that it was the ducks that imprinted on Lorenz that Bowlby took his work from. So, or created his theories on. So attachment theory is the idea that depending on how your caregivers attune to you emotionally would predict outcomes for your relationships in later life. So it really kind of creates this blueprint. And so in emotionally focused therapy, we're really trying to help couples create a secure attachment to each other. And sort of the basis of that is that we feel emotionally safe to, it almost sounds cliche to be ourselves, but really, those things that you feel like sometimes that you hold back a little bit, you're like, oh, I don't really want to say that because I'm afraid of how they're going to respond to that. And so I just kind of keep it to myself and I kind of brush it over that. Those are good indications that we don't necessarily have a lot of emotional safety in our relationship. We want to be really transparent with each other. It feels like it falls really short when we talk about honesty in this way because I almost feel like it doesn't get to the crux of what, I wish there was a different word, but the transparency around this is what's coming up for me right now and I'm going to share it with you. And a lot of times we just hold that back.
Yeah.
So In emotionally focused therapy, there's really three phases to the process, which is we work on de escalating what's going on. A lot of couples just don't understand that there is a negative cycle. But when they come in, I'm like, okay, well, okay, this happens. Then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? And they can tell the story usually. Oh, well, this and that and the other thing, right? So we start to map what's happening to them in their cycle. And we put that in the context of really pursuing and withdrawing. Like we're either using certain behaviors or protective behaviors to pursue a person or to withdraw from them, depending on what's happening. So I'll talk a little more about that in a minute.
Mm.
But this first phase is about mapping the cycle and de escalating it, really helping couples identify what's happening.
Yeah. What I hear you saying in that is that like couples can absolutely tell the story of like, this is what happens, this is how I get triggered, and this is how I respond. And I'm translating that in my head to you're taking the content and helping them understand the process, right?
Yeah.
Getting a little bit deeper into analyzing what's actually happening under the
Yeah.
surface rather than just the story that gets
Yeah.
told. The story is important, but taking it a layer deeper to understand what's actually happening for
Yeah.
each person.
Well, and I love that you're saying that because there is actually so much more under the surface. In a simplistic way, we can say, well, I tell people about 20% of what you see happening is just the behavior of your partner.
Mhm.
You don't know the other 80% of what's happening inside. And so we will hyper focus on that behavior. We'll point fingers at it. We'll blame. We'll say, this is what you're doing, da 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 da, right? But we don't understand what's actually going on inside, and vice versa, right? Like our partner's only seeing 20% of what we're doing. So we want to understand that emotional piece underneath, but we want to understand that 80%.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what you're talking about is we're almost the content is the behavior that we see.
Yeah.
And we're trying to understand the process of how it's happening, why it's happening, and get some context to it.
Yeah. Like an iceberg.
Yeah, like an iceberg. That's exactly right. So there's this process that I walk people through that we have to understand what the danger cue is. We have to understand the somatic part we've talked about in a previous episode. So go back and listen to that. But the somatic part of what is actually happening in the body, being able to label the emotion. It's so incredibly fascinating to see how many people can't actually label their emotion. And I say it like this: what is the emotion word? Did we talk about that before?
I don't know if we did.
I force people to do this because I'll ask them, what are you feeling? And then they'll start telling me stories. Well, I feel like they just don't listen to me. I feel like they don't care. And I'm like, you did not use an emotion word in that. Are you disappointed? Are you insecure? Are you like feeling lonely? What is that word? And that's when I have to sort of hand that emotion wheel to my people, my clients, to have them actually look, because no one ever taught them to actually identify what they were experiencing in their body. And so they're telling all these stories. And the funny thing is when they're telling those stories, they're sharing one more piece of their experience, which is what their thoughts are, what the meaning is that they're making about it. So there's the danger cue, and it goes like this. There's a danger cue, the somatic response, the emotion, right? And I always break it up into the deep emotion and then the surface level emotion,
Mhm.
because the one emotion that couples can talk about is anger,
Mhm.
right? Pisses me off. I'm so annoyed, right? So we know that's there. So I try and get it deeper. And then there's the meaning, the thoughts, and then the behavioral response or the protective reactive part. So I try and teach them that this is how it goes. It starts here and it goes to here. So all of that stuff underneath happens so fast, and that sometimes we can't even recognize our own protective behaviors, let alone everything that's happening internally. 'Cause some of it is so subconscious. So yes, we have to walk everybody kind of through that process. And this first stage of EFT takes the longest, because for a lot of people, we're building so much awareness around that. And if you've ever heard of the Johari window before, have you
No.
heard of that? I think a lot of people were taught this in like their early communications class if they went to college. But it's the idea that there's these four panes of glass in a window, and it's about the awareness or the things that we know about ourselves. One pain is that there's just things that I know about me that other people don't know. There's a pain of what I know and you know about me. And then there's one that only other people know about me that I don't know about me. And then there's the unknown. And this one where there's things that other people know about me that I don't know, that's where we really have to learn to build awareness. And that can be really scary because we don't have sort of any anchor to believing what another person is saying, especially if we experience them as a threat.
Yeah.
And that's what happens for a lot of couples is I experience you as a threat because when you do or say or whatever it is, you share with me, it feels like a threat to the relationship. And so everything starts to escalate.
Yeah. Okay.
So I lost my train of thought.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm
The Johari window.
the Johari window. And maybe you're going to get to this, but I'm finding myself really curious, not being a couples therapist. How does this differ from like a Gottman style couples
Yes,
therapy?
we are going to get to
Okay.
that.
Okay.
So let me tell you these other two sort of stages real quick. They're a lot less intense. But so that first piece is really the crux of a lot because once you see what's happening, now you have the ability to actually make changes. And as we start to flow into stage two, this is really where we help couples learn to re engage differently. So when you have a withdrawer, someone who tends to get scared of the conversation or it feels too intense, they'll pull away, right? They'll shut down. So either they'll withdraw like emotionally from the conversation or they'll literally physically withdraw from the conversation. And so with that withdrawer, we're trying to help them to stay. And what does that mean? What's under that? For a lot of withdrawers, we're learning to stay because of feelings of like inadequacy, right? And they feel like they're just not good enough. I can never get anything right for you. And so we're trying to get them to just stay in the conversation and not sort of fall apart into that, to be able to practice some self compassion and know, okay, whatever this person is sharing with me, that doesn't necessarily say that I'm a bad person. It's them actually trying to get closer to me and complaining. So that's always hard. And then for the pursuer, we're also trying to help them soften because pursuing sounds like a pretty nice word, but pursuing in this context can come out a lot differently. Like it can come out that way, and that can be kind of scary for withdrawers, but it also can come out in blaming language, right? Like attacking your partner, criticizing them, using contempt, which are all really nasty things to use in a relationship. And so I try and help them reframe what they're trying to say and how they're trying to express their needs in a way that their withdrawing partner can hear it. So that's kind of the second stage. And then the third stage, I hope that I'm getting this right, is that we're really trying to be more accepting of this new thing that we're doing. And that means that when you share with me, I stay, or the way that I share with you is different. And in that space, we can start to ask for our needs more clearly. We can start to get our needs met better. We can talk about new solutions and new ways forward and kind of accepting that new way.
Yeah. I
So,
really like everything that you're saying. It sounds in essence, and maybe you've said this before, just in like our conversations, it feels a little bit like individual therapy together. I
yeah,
really like the idea of that. I don't know. I don't have like any more words to put to that, but I'm really, really
I think you're
liking the
getting
sound
it.
of it. Yeah.
I think you're getting it because that's kind of as I got more and more into this, it's like, oh my gosh, you're doing individual therapy with two people in the room. But ultimately, in that second stage, I want to say this that second stage, what we're really doing is creating corrective emotional experiences for both partners. Because growing up, right, like a lot of these attachment injuries and where we develop insecure attachments, which I'll mention here in a minute, is that we had relational experiences that were not safe. And so that's why I love couples therapy is that I don't necessarily have to be that person that somebody has a corrective experience with. It almost sometimes for a lot of people feels a little disingenuous because they're paying me like I'm supposed to do these things. But in couples therapy, it's not me, it's their partner. It's the person that they want to do that with.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden they have these corrective experiences and their brain starts to rewire, right?
Yeah.
That, oh, when I share, that I go from having this thought or this feeling and being like, oh, I can't share that to being like, oh my gosh, the thing that actually feels good is to share it. So it really changes the way we experience relationships. And that's
I
really
love
cool.
that. I love that. I can see so clearly how so many people would benefit from that because I work with mostly with individuals solely. Why would I say mostly? I only work with individuals.
No couple.
But the more familiar I get with complex trauma and attachment wounds, the more I see the need for that corrective experience. And the more and more distance I want to put between myself. Like, I don't want to create dependency in my
Yeah.
clients on me to
Yeah.
be the only corrective experience, right? I think that's an important part of individual therapy. But I can see more and more how my clients would benefit from having people in their life who can attune to them in the way
Yeah.
that they need.
Yeah. I will say this, that sometimes individual therapy is needed. I've got some partners who are really, really, really dysregulated, and either it's really hard to create safety in the room, and so I need to work with them individually, or that dysregulation just is it needs a lot of space to breathe. And so, you end up taking up sometimes the whole session to really kind of help somebody explore some of that. And so sometimes it can be really helpful. Some of the couples that I've seen that have done the work more quickly are ones that have been in some individual therapy and have done some of that groundwork. Not everybody needs that. I've worked with couples who haven't necessarily needed like specific individual therapy, and the couples therapy works, but individual therapy like is needed still at some points. Like,
Yeah.
let's help. I mean, some of them, like I'm thinking of one in particular, several, is that they come in and they know nothing of trauma,
Yeah.
and when we start to talk about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, you have so much trauma and you have no idea. And so sometimes, like, I like to do some of that foundational conversation of trauma in couples therapy. So both partners are there and understanding it. But at some point, like, sometimes you just need to do some of that work on helping them self regulate, especially if they're having a hard time co regulating, which I wanted to talk, I feel like, at some point in here, because I feel like that's a big part of this. At least recently, I've started to notice the really deep need around physical co regulation between partners. It's been a theme for me in the last few weeks to be like, oh my gosh, like, you really need that. And so for some couples, I've been able to kind of help them bridge that gap where one partner does want to create some physical comfort for their partner, but their partner's like, I'm angry or I don't want it. And I've kind of pushed them a little bit. And either it's helped a lot. And so again, we're kind of rewiring the brain, creating corrective experiences. And for some, they're still experiencing like, this doesn't feel safe.
Mhm.
This still feels bad, or I just can't. So
Yeah.
that's when I'm like, okay, we probably need to work on some self regulation so that we can get to a point where we're regulated enough that we can do both.
Yeah. The thing that I think is beautiful about just like diversity in general, but diversity in therapists is that there's a place for everything,
Yeah.
right? There's a place for every kind of therapy. There's a place for individual couples. There's a place for solution focus. There's a place for trauma work, and everyone needs something a little bit different.
Yeah. And that's kind of the thing I love my ADHD brain loves so much is
Mhm.
like, I never know what this is going to look like. It's like a new experience every time somebody walks in.
Totally.
So,
I've thought that a lot actually about having an ADHD brain and thinking like my brain myself works really well with structure and knowing that I have like an hour and then lunch and then I have an hour and an
mhm,
hour and like my day is structured, but each hour is who knows, right? Like
yeah.
I know who to expect, but I don't know
What?
what they're bringing each day. So I get a nice combination of consistency and diversity.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
That's very cool.
That is definitely a tangent.
That's okay. What I want to mention, some people are like, what? Co regulation?
Yeah.
I feel like this could be its own episode, but
Oh, for sure.
just briefly so people don't get confused. Co-regulation is where we actually, when we are so emotionally distressed and we can't regulate ourselves, this is where we actually seek out another person and say, "Hey, I'm feeling something really big, whether we know what that is or not. Can you give me a hug? Can you sit with me?" And that person can come in and be a support. They're not rescuing you from your emotion. They're not taking it away. They're not saying, "Let me take care of it." But they're saying, "Yes, I can be here. I can sit with you." Um, and it's a really beautiful thing when you learn to do it. That's part of where like so much safety gets created. And I wish we really should not get too much into that.
No, I
have like a whole spiel,
I definitely just had like
conversation about it.
12 thoughts going of like, ooh, we should write that down for another episode
Yeah.
because that would be really
Yeah.
cool.
So that's just a snapshot that we work towards in EFT as well, is how do we co-regulate together when things get too distressing? And that's that gap, again, oftentimes is created in childhood when you don't have a parent who's emotionally attuned to helping you through that distress. So again, corrective experiences of how your partner can show up for you in that way.
Very cool.
So I was gonna the other piece I was gonna go over is attachment styles. Wasn't gonna spend too much time on this because I think, I don't know, I suppose it could also be its own thing, but I'll go through some of these and kind of define them briefly. So you're kind of split up into two: secure attachment and insecure attachment. Secure attachment is what we want. Secure attachment means I feel safe, I can be myself, I can hold boundaries, I can, be here for you. I don't rescue though. It's a really good balance. Insecure attachment is broken up into really three different categories, and that's anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment. That last one, a lot of people don't know about. So, anxious attachment is really kind of the idea that I didn't have parents or caregivers who were emotionally available. Sometimes there isn't a consistent response from them to be there. So either one, you just have emotionally distant parents who just don't show up, or you have some sort of inconsistency of when they're there for you and when they're not. And so the way that that comes out is sometimes what for some people feel like is needy, right? Especially for withdrawers who have more of the avoidant attachment. Anxious pursuers tend to seem more needy, right? And it just reinforces their belief that they're too much. But they come from this place of like, oh my gosh, are you going to be there for me? Like, where are you? I need you. Sort of frantic almost. And so they're always needing more attachment or more connection than maybe what is healthy in that secure attachment. And so that's kind of where that pursuing comes from a lot of times, is like, it's just not enough. It's never enough. And um, it flares up when you've got somebody who's a withdrawer who has an avoidant attachment and they're pulling back all the time. So going into avoidant attachment, it more comes from the experience of parents who were too much, right? I kind of, the way I categorize it is that they were bombarding in some way. So you can have a parent who is on this end of the spectrum who maybe helicopter parents, right? They're very involved in your life, like almost too involved, right? And it's like you want some space as a kid. Or it can be on this end of the spectrum where there's violence and abuse and neglect. So in some way it's too much. And so they learn, their belief is like, I don't find safety or comfort in other people. It's too much. Right.
Yeah.
So that's where they kind of pull away. An anxious attached and an avoidant attached couple is the most common.
I was going to say, as you're saying that, like, it feels very obvious as to why they're then drawn to each other because of that unhealed relational pattern.
It's familiar.
An anxiously attached person is going to be drawn to someone who's more avoidant and withdrawn because that's a familiar relationship pattern and vice versa.
And I will say that in that common pattern, men tend to be more of the avoider, women tend to be more of the pursuer. I think I don't want to give a percentage because I feel like I'm going to be totally off. But it is much higher.
Sure.
Of course, I see the opposite too. Withdrawers, when they're together, I would say honestly that is probably the most difficult to work with. because no one's like willing to take a risk. The pursuer's like always taking the risk because it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, I'll say something really mean to you just to get a reaction from you. And so withdrawing, withdrawing is really hard. It's like, come on,
Yeah.
like you can share a little bit, you can
Yeah.
try a little bit. It's like, no.
Yeah.
So that can be really difficult. And then obviously pursuer can be really intense.
I was going to say explosive potentially.
Yeah, it can be. But at least there's something to work with as it's there. So
Sure.
those are different. So then the last attachment style is disorganized attachment. And this is where I usually put complex trauma. This is where I talk about like, ooh, seems like you have complex trauma. We've got some disorganized attachment. This is where there's more violence, abuse, neglect at home.
In their childhood experience.
In their childhood experience. And it's much more chronic. And I always like to give this example of a double bind, which is a therapy term, because I feel like this happens a lot with disorganized attachment. And that looks like, you come home from school and you come to mom or dad and you're like, oh my gosh, I had this awesome day and this happened. But then Susie said this to me, right? And I'm sharing. And the response back is like, I'm too busy. Like, I don't like it when you do this, when you come home and tell me all of this. Like, I'm really busy when you get home, right? And then the kid starts to pull away and they stop sharing. And then all of a sudden, like the next week, mom or dad's like, why don't you ever share anything with me? You never talk to me about what's going on at school. Right. So now you're getting these two messages and you're like, but there's like no winning.
Yeah.
Like in either case, I can't do something right. And there's a lot of that. I feel like with people with disorganized attachment, that they grew up a lot with a lot of these mixed messages of what they're supposed to do, what they're supposed to believe about themselves. And it's just,
there's not a lot of
I want to
consistency.
swear.
That's okay.
Well, my son wants to watch this. And like, I don't know if I'm going to let you. I swear in it. It's what I had a client term as a mind fuck.
Oh, yeah.
And and this happens in just romantic relationships too, but it's like it almost feels like this gaslighting. Sometimes I'll term it as like unintentional gaslighting because I think sometimes parents there's a whole broad range of spectrum, right? Like there's some parents that I don't think intentionally do these things, whether there's a trauma piece for them or not. I think some of it is just very ingrained in the way that we parent. And so it's just this sort of denial of reality. Well, mom, like I tried to talk to you about it. No, you didn't. Like you never do that. Like when have you tried to do that? That didn't happen. Right? Like you can kind of hear how it almost sounds benign, but when it happens on this consistent basis, you just start to get really confused and you don't really know what's up from down.
Yeah. And I would imagine too, like you're giving an example that maybe is like a simple example, but generally people with disorganized attachment have multiple of those types of experience on a chronic ongoing basis. It's not like this one particular thing of trying to talk to your parents when you come home from school. It's like pervasive in the interactions in the relationship all the time.
Yeah, pervasive is the right word. It's just constantly happening.
Yeah.
On so many levels, right? Different things.
Yeah.
So yeah. So those are the 3 types of disorganized attachment. Would you add anything to those 3?
No, I think that you summarized that really, really well. I think I work a lot off the basis of attachment theory, but I also don't feel like I know it super well and very clearly. So I think you gave a really good overview, and I think that would be a really good topic for another episode in the future to maybe deep dive a bit more into attachment theory.
Yeah, there's so much that kind of details those, and I would love to talk about sort of like the symptoms of those types of things.
Yeah.
So that would be
really
cool to
cool.
talk about that. So I'm trying to decide here. I think we talked about the negative cycles and the pursuing and withdrawing. I let couples know this kind of surprises people sometimes, but it makes sense to them that in these patterns, essentially what we're doing on a consistent basis to each other is just emotionally abandoning each other all the time, which I think surprises people. Like, it's like, wait a second, what? Like, the last thing I want to be doing is like abandoning you.
Yeah.
At least most most people
Yeah.
don't want to be doing that.
For the sake of this conversation, we're talking about like, yes, generally well-adjusted
Yeah.
people who are not intentionally hurting.
Right.
We're not talking about
Right.
abuse dynamics.
Right. I'm glad that you're pointing that out. So part of the other thing that I've noticed is a big theme with EFT is that as we own our own personal experience, we create safety for our partner. So when I can say something like, okay, I'm noticing that when I feel really lonely, I start to lash out at you. Like owning that makes our partner almost like every time I have a partner like share that, the other partner will ask them, okay, like what was that like for you for them to share that? And almost immediately, I mean, it can kind of go one of two ways, but the one way is like, I feel relieved. I feel closer, right? Because I'm not having to point that out to you.
Yeah.
The other way that it can go is that some people will take it personally, right? Because it's like, well, if you know that you do that, why don't you stop?
Hmm.
Right. So that just means that there's an additional part of like the cycle is still in the room. It's
Sure.
still happening. So
Okay, so tell us how EFT is different than like other types of couples therapy. Gottman is a really common one that
yeah,
most people are familiar with and kind of felt like the standard for a long time. Maybe
yeah.
maybe still does in some
Mhm.
areas. I've heard so much about EFT now that Gottman doesn't necessarily feel like the standard in my mind, but most people are really familiar with that. Tell us a little bit how this is different or maybe yeah, we'll just go with different.
Different. Well, I in our first episode or intro episode or whatever it was, like I talked about how my I became a couples therapist because of Gottman's work.
Yeah.
And what I've just recognized that's so different is that um, Gottman's work focuses a lot on cognitive behavioral therapy, where we're looking at seeing those things that we need to change. Like if I'm using contempt, I need to stop using contempt, right? I need to be more appreciative. I need to, kind of go in a different direction. Or instead of criticizing, I'm going to complain, right? So all of those things are really good. But what you find with trauma in particular is that people don't have access to those skills even if they learn them. Because when we get flooded, when we feel a threat and our prefrontal cortex shuts down, that's where all of those skills are stored. So time and time again, both as I was trying to teach these skills and what I've just seen and my own personal experience is that all of that goes out the window when you're in a fight. So it doesn't really work to go to therapy to learn skills from a therapist and then to go home and try it. It just doesn't create success for couples.
Yeah.
So what's different, I feel like about EFT, and I don't know, maybe I'm taking it a little further because I have seen the Gottmans do some of their work and videos and where maybe they are doing more of this application based. So this might not necessarily be a knock on Gottman therapy,
Of course.
especially if you're maybe a certified Gottman therapist where there is more application in the session. I would say that I would compare this more to maybe like what you might call traditional couples therapy, where instead of teaching you and sending you home to try it, and then coming back and talking about what worked, what didn't work, I'm actually forcing you to do it in the session.
Mm.
So we're practicing it. I'm saying, I kind of try to give people a little bit of a foundation of like, this is what we're going to be doing and this is why.
Mhm.
And then we do it. And so when that intensity comes up, right? When you do have that negative cycle pop up where you've got that pursuer that says, "You did this thing," and then they start to shut down and pull away, like, I can't do anything right for you. I can never do anything right. That's when I come into work, right? I always thought it would be really fun to go to couples' homes and just kind of sit around and just wait until a fight happened. And then
Mhm.
I could come in and help. You can do that in therapy
Mm.
most of the time. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult if they're not escalated.
And this is why you've said like, "Ooh, which one of you do I need to poke at first to get
Yes.
something going
Yes.
so that we can
Yeah.
practice?" Essentially, right? Like
Yeah.
practice these skills here in therapy when there's support and an unbiased third person to help kind of observe and guide.
All of that. Yep. I'm going to poke that because in the first part of therapy, like in that first stage and even in that second stage, we want that negative cycle to come up so we can work with it.
Mm.
And so sometimes it's hard because traditional therapy, you come in and the therapist goes, "Oh, so what happened this week?" "Well, we had a fight and this is what happened. And he said this and she said that. And it just blew up and da 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 da." Right. And okay, now I, as a therapist, am in a situation where there's a he said, she said situation
Mm,
because somebody will sometimes inevitably they'll say like, "I did what you said. I did what you told me to do, and I said it really nice." And I'm like, "I wonder if you really did." Right? Because you might be saying that you feel something, but you might actually not be saying it nicely.
mhm,
You think that you're saying it nicely. And so that's why traditional therapy doesn't work because all of a sudden you're analyzing something, and as a therapist, you are put in the middle to decide who was right and who was wrong in a fight. And that's when like my alarm bells go off and I'm like, okay, we're talking too much about what happened. If they can come in and be on the same page of what happened, then we can kind of talk about it a little bit better because that means that we can have some ownership. But if there's no agreement on what actually happened, that's when I'm like, okay, we're going to pin that. And that's when I start to poke. And even if they're talking about that, there's usually something that comes up because they're still upset about it.
mhm.
Nothing's been resolved. So somebody inevitably will
Yeah.
get upset.
Yeah.
So then I'll be like, oh, what is that for you? What's happening? Where's this anger coming from? What's under that? And that's when we start rolling.
No, it sounds like what you're describing in this like he said, she said situation is almost unintentionally triangulating yourself as the
Yeah.
therapist. And that's a horrible place to be. No, I don't think any therapist is ever like wants that. That sounds
And
like a horrible place to be.
you're
And
just
I
like,
think that
I,
that's always been my understanding of couples therapy, which is partly why I've always been like,
um,
oh, I don't want any part of that. I don't want to have to like worry about accidentally taking sides with somebody
mhm,
and because I'm always going to side with, this type of person because of my bias, right? Like
mhm,
that sounds horrible, but the idea of just like in the moment, like that in the here and now relational type approach,
yeah.
what's happening for you right now is it's been really game changing for me even in individual sessions. I can see how that works. I can picture how this looks in a couple
Yeah.
session.
Because there's 2 parts to it. One, as I'm seeing it, I can actually call stuff out and
Yeah.
say, like, but it's the way that you call it out is actually very compassionate because you try to get to the crux of it, right? I mean, we need to get into some parenting stuff. But I mean, generally people know on some level, like when you've got a kid that's being a bully, there's something probably going on at home, right? Like
Mhm.
kids don't just go and bully kids.
Yeah.
You know, when they're throwing a tantrum, there's like an unmet need, like they're needing attention in some way.
Mm.
And so when you've got a partner that becomes really contemptful, let's say, to their partner, that's when I say, "Oh, that's really contemptful. Like, what's happening for you right now?
Mhm.
Like, where is that coming from?" I'm trying to be more curious, which is what is really hard for a partner to do. Eventually, when there's a more emotional safety and my partner is contemptful, I don't feel threatened by it. I
Mhm.
actually want to get more curious with it because we've created that space together. But that's kind of where I'm sort of this buffer
Mhm.
in couples therapy to do that work, to create safety for the partner that doesn't want to respond to it, right? And create safety for the partner who's actually got an unmet need that's coming up that they don't know how to like express it in a way that feels safe for their partner.
Yeah. That sounds really cool.
So
I mean, I know you've been trying to like, what's the word you always use? I'm gonna get the word that comes to mind is convert, but that feels like religious.
convince.
Convince me to be interested in couples work. But I feel like every time we talk about it, I'm like, sounds really cool, actually.
It is really
Yeah.
cool
EFT might be an eventual
thing.
thing for me,
You
an eventual
do
training.
you do have to get more comfortable with conflict.
Yeah.
Really comfortable with it because it's always there. And like I'm saying, you don't the negative cycle isn't it's funny because in training they talk about let's help the couple not find enemies in each other, but find an enemy in the cycle. But in therapy, as a therapist, I try to talk to them about it in that way, but also in the same like sentence describing it as like a good thing for it to come out. You know, recently I've had to have some conversations with some of my couples because I'm like, you guys are like coming in here on your best behavior. I need that. I need the cycle to come up because otherwise I can't help you. Right. And if you're just trying to like keep it all in, right, and you're not doing the things that you normally do at home, it's not helpful to this process. Like, let me see it. I think there's just some worry that I'm going to judge them in the way that they're handling it, which is not surprising. But
Of course. I think in any situation, any type of therapy, our clients perform a little bit, right? Or they're on
mhm,
their best behavior, at least for a little while. For some, forever, for a long time. For some,
you have
they
to
drop
keep,
that sooner than later. But yeah, I think
yeah,
that's a pretty like normal experience for most
yeah,
clients.
yeah, definitely normalize that.
Yeah,
It just might mean that your therapist talks about it.
sure.
Something's happening here.
Yeah,
It's just taking a step back and recognizing that. We talk about always slicing it thinner and EFT because there's so many of these little things that happen that we're
hmm
not paying attention to.
hmm
And I always feel like I never do it justice to talk about that in a way that is understandable. It's almost like you have to have that experience to be like, that's what you mean
yeah,
by like slicing it thinner, oh, that thing does happen to me every time this happens. And I've never noticed that before. So you have to kind of have that experience to, I feel
yeah,
like, understand that. But, anyways, that's what I love about EFT. That's what I love about therapies that are more application based. So, like I said, maybe I need to kind of step back and not necessarily say that about Gottman's therapy. You, if you're a Gottman therapist, you're welcome to send a DM and
yeah. Correct.
curse me out.
But I think in the same way, like, so from my perspective, I think of like cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy as they're very cognitive,
Mhm.
skill based kinds of therapies. And again, I think they have their place. I don't knock them
Especially with trauma.
entirely. They have their place, but they're not the complete story.
Yeah.
There's an incompleteness to that approach for trauma.
Mm.
And I hear you saying the same thing because I've read one of Gottman's books and I thought it was really good. I think they have a lot of really good concepts and principles and things to apply. But when you have trauma, there's this like deeper piece that also has to be looked
Yeah.
at. So I don't see anything that you've said as being dismissive of Gottman therapy, but that it's not the one and only for everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. They do have an intervention, the Gottmans, that kind of address that on some level. And I've just found that the EFT process just works and flows a lot better, especially when you add in that trauma piece. You're always addressing those underlying things, regardless of where they come from.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, I love that. So then how would someone know if they would benefit from EFT versus any other type of couples therapy?
I mean, I'm biased. I'm like everybody.
I know.
Everybody. I mean,
Yeah.
couples therapy can be helpful. I think there's a difference probably between couples um who are not escalated, who feel like they can pretty well communicate well together, and maybe there's just like some things that aren't clicking and they can use those. I mean, what the truth is that by the time I get towards the end of the EFT process, I start to add in all the Gottman stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, now you guys are regulated, we're emotionally safe. Here's all this great stuff. Like, you probably only need to read this book and start to recognize and implement these things. Because, again, one of the things I love about Gottman is he adds this beautiful cherry on top, which is creating shared meaning together. It's like once we have all of the pieces that have to be there foundationally, now we start working together to create this culture and this life together. So I think couples who just can't quite figure it out. A lot of couples come in really confused. Like, we don't know what's happening. There's certain things that it's like, I feel like we can communicate well. And sometimes it just doesn't. I don't know. I don't feel like I can answer this well because I think generally any couple who wants to do couples therapy will benefit always. People who have trauma are for sure going to benefit more from the EFT process than something like a cognitive behavioral or traditional couples therapy process. It's the escalation and the intensity and the frequency of it. If it's just like, man, we just can't talk about this stuff, it's, and it just, or we just, if you see that pursuing withdrawing patterns, it might kind of point to that.
There's definitely some parallel in how I feel about somatic modalities. I think they'd be good for everybody, right? Like
Yeah.
it is sometimes hard to answer that question of like, it's amazing. Like everyone needs this.
Yeah.
But in
Especially when we
particular,
see the populations that we do.
yeah. Yeah.
People who might benefit from like, couples therapy that is more behavioral based or individual therapy more behavioral based or people who are more regulated.
Yeah. I think that's the piece is for a long time, I kind of thought really negatively about CBT and DBT, and I kind of like poo-pooed it a little bit. And then as I've like matured, I've come back around to like it has its place, but it's not helpful if the emotional regulation isn't there. They're surface level good concepts, good principles, but the ability to implement them requires that prefrontal cortex to be online. And if that's not online, it doesn't matter how many skills that you know.
Oh.
Whether this is in an individual setting or a couple setting, you have to be able to establish that sense of internal emotional safety before you can then implement a skill of some kind.
Case in point, I had a 50-year-old man come into my office, been to tons of therapy, read tons of self-help books. And I was the first therapist that said, "You have trauma."
Wow.
So he had been trying all of these things, right? Trying to read all these books to gain these skills, a total inability to apply them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was only until he started to recognize his own trauma that something started to shift.
Yeah. Because a traumatized brain operates differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should probably talk about that another time.
Another time.
So,
Okay.
I mean, those are some things that you can look for, So if you keep having the same fight over and over and over again, that's a helpful point to make. Or if you think it's a little bit easier to say, like, if one of you feels like you're too much and somebody else feels like they're just not good enough, or if both of you feel like you're too much, or both of you feel like you're not good enough, and we can't ever talk, those are good indications too that we've got that pursuing withdrawing pattern.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
Some things that maybe you can think about, the listeners, just think of sort of the last argument that you had with somebody and what was the surface fight about and what do you feel like maybe was the deeper rooted part of that fight and or at least the deeper feeling underneath it because our emotions and I think we talked about this in our last episode that our behaviors are driven by our emotions. If we don't understand what the emotions are, if we can't label the emotion word, we're not going to know what's driving why we do what we do.
Yeah.
So in these conflicts, really paying attention to that, you can kind of, just a little exercise.
I like it. I like I like that we've done little exercises at the end. Give people a little bit of an experience with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
And then you can also just pay attention to that pursuing withdrawing. Like, are you the one that tends to bring up issues, demand, or push? Or do you tend to withdraw in a way that you either shut down, avoid, or pull back? You can kind of identify that for yourself.
Yeah. Good reflection questions. How do people find a therapist like you?
You can go to ISF. Therapists have so many acronyms.
I know.
It's ICEEFT.com.
We'll put it in the show notes.
It just stands for the International Center something, EFT. Functionally America's Therapy. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
So you can go there. They have a directory that you can look at. I think that that's probably the best place to look because it shows to be on that directory, you have to have some formal training. There's the externship is the first one, core skills is the second one, and then certification. It's a pretty simple process, but that at least you'll know that there's formal training. You can look on Psychology Today. I just find that there's a lot of therapists that will say that they use certain things and they might use portions of it. It's the same thing with like Gottman therapy. Like people will use Gottman principles, but have they gone through the formal training? Do they actually work you through that process? When I talk about those 3 phases, like there is a protocol that you work through. And a lot of therapies have protocols and not everybody does the protocol. I mean, I'm at fault of that too, like with EMDR.
Yeah.
So if you want somebody who's actually working you through those 3 phases, going to the official directory is probably the best. Also just do, consultations and ask therapists, like, do you use the EFT protocol? Do you go through the 3 phases? Like what is your approach to EFT and how do you utilize it? Because again, there might just still be parts of it that they use rather than the whole process.
Yeah. I would imagine too that there would be therapists who kind of use an EFT model, whether they know it or not, and maybe asking a question in a consult like, will you help us identify like our process, right? Instead of just focusing on our arguments and our conflict, will you help us really process like what's happening between us? Kind of questions like that see if this is a therapist who's going to help you dig a little bit deeper than simple like problem solving techniques.
Yes. I do love it when couples, I can hear that they're talking in that way. And I'm like, okay, we already have some awareness and that's going to be really helpful.
Yeah.
So those would be really great questions.
Cool.
So,
okay. Well, thanks for sharing.
Thanks for letting me talk about this thing that I love so much.
It makes me so excited to learn more and more about EFT. I feel like every time we talk, I'm like, okay, I'm like inching that much closer. One day.
We'll push you over the edge. We'll push you over the edge. Well, if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to DM us. We'll be happy to respond to those.
Perfect.
But what a great episode.
Love it. Thanks for being here.
Next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to No Couch Required. We'd love to keep the conversation going with you. Connect with us on Instagram at No Couch Required Pod and let us know your thoughts. If you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, send them our way. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And consider leaving us a review. It really helps others find the show. We'll see you at our next episode.